"Sir, I need you to step outside, now." 6 a.m., and there's a police officer at my door with handcuffs on his belt. I'm standing there in my bathrobe, heart hammering, wondering if my HOA president Karen finally found a way to have me arrested. The cold morning air hits me as I step onto the concrete. Karen's positioned by her mailbox, watching like this is entertainment. That smug smile tells me everything. After 2 years of harassment and a $3,900 fine designed to destroy us, she thinks she's about to watch me get dragged away in handcuffs. Then my wife Elena appears behind me carrying her work portfolio, and something in the air shifts. The confident look on Karen's face flickers for just a moment. She has no idea she's about to learn the most expensive lesson of her life. What would you do if your neighbor called the cops over fake HOA violations? Drop your location below, because what happened next left everyone speechless. Let me back up and tell you how we got here, because Karen Pemberton didn't just wake up one morning and decide to destroy a disabled veteran's life. This woman spent 8 years perfecting the art of suburban terrorism. My name's Marcus, I'm 45, and 20 years in the Army left me with a purple heart, a bum knee, and the kind of patience you only learn dodging actual bullets. My wife Elena's the quiet type, always reading, mysterious about her work, has meetings she never explains. We moved to Willowbrook Estates in Phoenix seeking peaceful retirement. Instead, we got World War III with a HOA twist. Our modest ranch house has a small front garden, American flag, and the wheelchair ramp that started this whole nightmare. The metallic smell of fresh aluminum was still sharp in the desert air when Karen first appeared at our door 3 weeks after we moved in, measuring tape and camera ready like she'd struck gold. Karen Pemberton owns the biggest house on our cul-de-sac and rules our HOA like a suburban dictator. 52 years old, real estate agent, perfectly manicured everything. Every morning at 7 sharp, her designer heels click-clack against the asphalt as she patrols for violations. This woman actually carries a ruler. I've seen her measure grass heights while neighbors peek through their blinds in terror. The ramp incident revealed Karen's true nature. Despite having permits, inspections, and medical documentation, she slapped us with a violation for unauthorized structural modification. When I showed her my Purple Heart and explained it was medically necessary, she looked directly at my military citation and said, "Everyone has problems, Mr. Santos. That doesn't mean property values should suffer." I nearly choked on my own spit. This woman was arguing that my war injuries hurt her bottom line. What followed was a masterclass in petty tyranny. Garbage can 6 inches from the curb? $200. American flag the wrong shade of red. Apparently she has a patriotism color chart. $300. Elena's garden gnome violated appropriate ornamentation standards. $150 for a ceramic dwarf. Each violation arrived in manila envelopes reeking of Karen's desperation disguised as perfume. Professional photos, timestamps, certified mail delivery. She documented everything like she was building a federal case instead of harassing neighbors over lawn decorations. Here's what made it criminal. Karen's enforcement was more selective than a country club membership committee. Mrs. Patterson's broken Christmas lights have blinked since January. 0 violations. The Johnsons park their boat in the driveway daily, clearly against HOA rules. Also ignored, but God forbid Elena plants tomatoes without submitting an environmental impact study. Our neighbor Tom, another Purple Heart recipient, quietly told me the previous 3 families in our house all moved out after Karen's campaigns. Young Hispanic couple with kids lasted 18 months before fleeing. Elderly black gentleman before them couldn't fight City Hall, Tom said, shaking his head. The pattern was unmistakable. Karen targeted anyone who didn't fit her lily-white suburban fantasy. What really got under my skin was watching other neighbors. They'd smile and wave, clearly sympathetic, but the moment Karen appeared, they'd scurry inside like prairie dogs spotting a hawk. Fear hung over our street thicker than Phoenix smog. Karen had created a neighborhood where decent people were terrified of their own HOA president. Throughout this escalating nightmare, Elena remained mysteriously calm. While I wanted to march over and educate Karen about constitutional rights, Elena would file each violation notice away and promise we'd handle this properly. I'd catch her taking detailed notes during long evening phone calls, speaking in hushed, professional tones about things I couldn't quite hear. Her desk accumulated stacks of official documents, courthouse seals, government letterheads, the sharp scent of fresh legal ink filling our home office. When I asked about her increasingly frequent work meetings, Elena would deflect with vague mentions of research projects. Sometimes she'd dress up in full business attire, leather briefcase in hand, looking more authoritative than I'd ever seen her. She'd return hours later with more mysterious paperwork and that same quiet confidence that everything would work out fine. I should have realized my bookish wife was preparing Karen's financial funeral. 3 months into Karen's reign of terror, she discovered what she thought was her nuclear weapon, the Great Garden Gambit of 2024. Elena had spent weeks lovingly tending a small vegetable garden in our backyard corner. Tomatoes, herbs, peppers, nothing fancy. The rich scent of fresh basil would drift over our evening dinners, and watching Elena's face light up during harvest was the first genuine happiness I'd seen since we'd moved to this suburban prison. Then, Karen struck with the precision of a legal sniper. The violation notice arrived on a Tuesday, hand-delivered with Karen's signature theatrical flair. $800 for our vegetable garden allegedly violating Phoenix's desert habitat protection mandate. According to Karen's creative interpretation, tomatoes and herbs constituted invasive species disrupting neighborhood ecological harmony. We had 48 hours to destroy Elena's garden or face daily $50 penalties. I'm reading this lunacy while my morning coffee burns my tongue, thinking Karen has finally achieved complete detachment from reality. Elena just nods calmly and says, "Interesting. Let me look into this." While I'm fantasizing about creative uses for Karen's measuring tape, Elena vanishes for the entire weekend. Saturday and Sunday, gone from dawn to dusk, claiming she's researching the ordinance at the library. I figured she was doing responsible citizen homework while I plotted revenge scenarios involving garden gnomes and HOA bylaws. Monday morning, Elena materializes with a manila folder thick as a metropolitan phone book. Inside, she's assembled copies of actual city ordinances, highlighted passages, handwritten notes in her precise script, and what looks like a master's thesis on municipal law. The scratching sound of her pen across legal documents had kept me awake Sunday night, but I'd assumed it was just Elena being thorough. Turns out Karen had performed Olympic-level mental gymnastics to twist the law. The real ordinance applies exclusively to commercial developments over 5 acres. Residential vegetable gardens aren't just allowed. They're explicitly protected under Phoenix's Residential Food Security Initiative. I remembered reading somewhere that dozens of states had passed these right-to-garden laws specifically to prevent HOA food garden restrictions, but Elena had the actual legal citations proving it. But Elena's weekend hadn't been spent just at the library. She'd conducted a neighborhood investigation that would make a private detective jealous. Karen's own backyard, it turned out, was a botanical crime scene of ordinance violations. Non-native roses requiring illegal chemical fertilizers, imported palm trees violating water restriction codes, decorative fountain operating during drought mandates. Karen's property broke more environmental laws than a coal plant. Elena had photographed everything with scientific precision, time-stamped each violation, cross-referenced plant species with municipal databases. The woman had built a case file that could prosecute a federal environmental crime. Tuesday morning, Elena strolled across the street and hand-delivered her research in a professional presentation folder. I watched from our kitchen window as Karen's expression evolved from smug confidence through confused concern to something approaching existential dread. Elena spoke maybe 3 sentences, left the folder on Karen's perfect porch table, and returned home with the satisfied stride of someone who'd just checkmate a chess opponent. 20 minutes later, Karen was frantically pacing her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, flipping through Elena's documentation like she was reading her own obituary. I could hear fragments of her conversation drifting across the street. "Can't be legal," and "How did she know about—" The call lasted 45 minutes, and by the end, Karen looked like she'd been intellectually steamrolled. That afternoon, the violation notice quietly disappeared from our door. No explanation, no apology, just gone. But Karen, being Karen, decided doubling down on stupid was her best strategy. Within hours, she'd called an emergency HOA meeting to vote on enhanced landscaping restrictions. 24 hours notice, barely legal, scheduled during work hours when most residents couldn't attend. Karen was trying to railroad through retroactive rules that would justify her garden assault. What Karen didn't realize was that Elena's weekend research had included more than city codes. Mrs. Violet quietly mentioned that Elena had visited her, asking detailed questions about her own violation history. 15 citations in 18 months, all targeting Mrs. Violet's Chinese New Year decorations and traditional plants. Elena's questions had been oddly specific: dates, documentation, whether Mrs. Violet felt ethnically targeted, the kind of question someone with legal training might ask. That evening, Elena's phone rang constantly. Brief, professional conversations conducted in that careful tone I was learning to recognize. She'd take notes, ask pointed questions about timelines and witnesses, thank people politely before hanging up. Our dining room table became command central, covered with neighborhood violation records Elena had somehow collected. When I asked what was happening, Elena smiled with the quiet confidence of someone holding 4 aces. Karen made a critical error picking this fight. She has no idea what she's actually dealing with. The smell of Elena's thriving basil plants drifted through our evening air, and for the first time in months, I felt something besides anger. I felt anticipation, especially after Elena casually mentioned discovering that Karen's brother Dale had mysteriously received the city's native landscaping enforcement contract the exact same week Karen started her garden crusade. What were the odds? Karen's response to Elena's legal ambush proved that some people double down on stupid when cornered. Instead of retreating like any sane person who'd just been caught violating the laws they pretended to enforce, Karen decided escalation was her best strategy. Monday morning arrived with the bitter taste of burnt coffee and the unexpected sight of a city inspector at our door, looking about as enthusiastic as a man attending his own audit. Behind him lurked Karen's brother Dale, wearing a contractor's vest and a grin that screamed family conspiracy. Anonymous tip about unpermitted electrical work, the inspector explains apologetically. Gotta check it out, though your permits are clearly visible in our system. 20 minutes later, after finding our installation textbook perfect, the inspector's shaking his head with professional disgust. Whoever called this in wasted everyone's time. Your electrician did beautiful work. Dale's triumphant expression melted like ice cream on summer concrete, but Karen wasn't finished demonstrating her commitment to criminal stupidity. That afternoon, our electrician Joe calls with barely controlled fury. Marcus, the state licensing board got a formal complaint about my work on your ramp. Someone's trying to destroy my business over a perfect installation. Joe stops by that evening, phone in hand, showing us text messages that made my blood pressure spike. Unknown number offering him cash to find creative violations in our electrical work. Messages dated the day after Elena's devastating research delivery to Karen. Elena examines the texts with laser focus, like she's reading court evidence. Joe, you mentioned someone called pretending to be a city inspector. Did you save that voicemail? That's when Joe reveals Elena had already coached him on documentation, before I even knew we had a problem. The voicemail was obviously Karen's voice, poorly disguised, claiming to be Supervisor Williams from Municipal Compliance. She'd asked detailed questions about our permit process, fishing for ammunition. I remembered reading about federal fraud penalties for impersonating government officials, something about massive fines and potential prison time. But Elena was nodding like she already knew exactly which laws Karen had shattered. While I'm marveling at Karen's spectacular legal incompetence, Elena's phone rings. She answers with unfamiliar authority. This is Elena Santos. Her tone shifts to something crisp, professional, almost judicial. She excuses herself to the porch, and I catch fragments about evidence protocols and witness documentation. When she returns, I'm staring like she's revealed superpowers. Elena explains calmly that her work correspondence has increased lately, courthouse documents, official communications she can't discuss in detail. Her mysterious meetings suddenly make more sense. Before I can process this revelation, Karen launches her next attack. Social media warfare. Wednesday evening, Mrs. Violet arrives with her tablet, face flushed with righteous anger. She shows us Karen's overnight creation. Willowbrook Community Standards Facebook group featuring photos of our house with captions like, "When new residents refuse to respect neighborhood values," and "Property standard decline affects everyone's investment." Karen had rallied supporters using coded language about community character and protecting what we've built. The comment section buzzed with neighbors debating people who don't appreciate established standards. The smell of digital mob mentality was nauseating. Elena was already documenting everything. While I planned angry responses, she systematically screenshotted each post before Karen could delete evidence. She'd been tracking Karen's harassment campaign since day one, building what increasingly looked like a bulletproof legal case. Thursday brought another puzzle piece. Tom, our veteran neighbor, visits with his own thick documentation folder. Elena had interviewed him too, asking pointed questions about Karen's enforcement patterns. Tom shows us violation photos Karen took of his Purple Heart Memorial. 15 different angles, detailed measurements, complaints about military displays disrupting aesthetic harmony. Elena's questions were very specific, Tom explains. Whether I felt targeted for military service, if I had proof other residents weren't cited for similar displays. Made me realize Karen's been systematically discriminating for years. That evening, Elena transforms our dining table into command headquarters. Tom's records, Mrs. Violet's violations, our growing file, spread across the surface like battle plans. The pattern was mathematically impossible to ignore. 90% of Karen's enforcement targeted minorities, veterans, anyone outside her suburban supremacist vision. Elena's phone rang constantly. Each conversation followed identical patterns: professional greeting, careful questions about documentation and timelines, polite appreciation before hanging up. She was systematically contacting every neighbor in Karen's crosshairs, building a network that felt distinctly prosecutorial. Friday afternoon, delivery trucks brought boxes marked "Confidential Judicial Correspondence." Elena signed personally, arranged everything in her office with scientific precision. Weekend sounds included constant printer activity, paper shuffling, the methodical organization of someone preparing for legal war. Sunday evening, I peek into Elena's office sanctuary. She's surrounded by legal documents, timeline charts, evidence portfolios that would make federal prosecutors jealous. The sharp scent of fresh ink fills the air as Elena works past midnight, constructing something far beyond neighborhood dispute resolution. "What exactly are you building?" I finally ask. Elena looks up from her work, and for the first time since this nightmare started, her smile carries genuine anticipation. Karen's about to discover that some battles can't be won through intimidation and fraud. Outside, Karen's porch light glowed as she conducted another frantic damage control phone call, completely unaware that Elena was documenting every desperate mistake. Karen's third-month assault revealed the true depth of her suburban sociopathy. She was going to destroy us financially, slowly, and publicly, while documenting our humiliation for entertainment. The certified letter arrived Wednesday morning, thick as a court summons and twice as threatening. Karen had calculated our accumulated violations to exactly $3,900, a number that felt surgically precise, designed to maximize pain without triggering whatever legal protections Elena seemed to understand intuitively. Pay immediately, or face property lien and potential foreclosure. But Karen's masterstroke was the payment plan option. Avoid the lien by publicly apologizing to the entire neighborhood, admitting our disruptive behavior, and submitting to monthly compliance inspections. She wanted us crawling on our bellies while live streaming our degradation to her Facebook followers. I'm staring at this extortion letter while my disability check sits unopened on the kitchen counter, running calculations that don't work. Medical bills already had us eating ramen twice a week. Elena's income remained mysteriously undefined, though she insisted we couldn't afford prolonged litigation right now. The bitter irony burned like acid reflux, a disabled veteran losing his home to a wannabe dictator who'd never sacrificed anything more significant than her manicure appointment. Karen scheduled her emergency assessment meeting with military precision, exactly 72 hours notice, minimum legal requirement, 2 p.m. Thursday when working residents couldn't attend. Her strategy was bulletproof: rubber stamp the lien with only her allies present, then steamroll any opposition with democratic process. Thursday afternoon, I enter the community center's stale air alone. Elena claimed an unavoidable work commitment, but promised everything would resolve favorably. Karen held court with her two remaining board allies, live streaming to her Facebook echo chamber while the musty scent of rarely used meeting rooms mixed with her suffocating perfume. "Mr. Santos," Karen announces with prosecutorial authority, "you have 15 minutes to present your defense before we authorize lien proceedings." I spread Elena's research across the folding table: city codes, violation comparisons, photographic evidence of Karen's own violations. Karen dismisses everything with practiced contempt. "Rules are rules, Mr. Santos. Your documented pattern of violations demonstrates consistent disregard for community standards." The prepared apology letter waited like a loaded gun. Karen wanted me reading it aloud, on live stream, confessing to failing to respect established community values and diminishing property standards through inappropriate modifications. Facebook comments supported our family, but Karen ignored them completely. Two choices, Karen declared, savoring absolute power. Full payment today, or read this apology and accept our enhanced monitoring program. Then Elena walked in. She entered wearing professional attire I'd never seen. Black blazer, leather briefcase, moving with an authority that commanded immediate attention. Her heels clicked against linoleum like a judge's gavel, each step echoing through the suddenly silent room. Karen's triumphant expression flickered with uncertainty as Elena took a back row seat, opened her briefcase, and began taking precise notes. Elena's presence transformed the entire atmosphere. She wasn't just another neighbor anymore. Something about her bearing suggested someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. After 20 minutes of Karen's performance, Elena stood quietly. "Mrs. Pemberton, before finalizing this vote, I believe you should review some additional documentation." Elena approached the table and handed Karen a manila envelope bearing an official seal I couldn't quite read from my angle. Karen's hands visibly trembled as she opened it, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and pure terror in real time. This information can't be accurate," Karen stammered, staring at Elena like she'd revealed supernatural powers. Elena returned to her seat without explanation. Her phone buzzed with a text, and she glanced at it with professional detachment before making a brief note in her legal pad. The live stream audience watched Karen's confidence evaporate like water on hot asphalt. Whatever Elena had delivered contained information that instantly transformed Karen from neighborhood tyrant to panicked defendant. Her board allies exchanged bewildered glances, clearly unaware of the bombshell that had just detonated their meeting. Karen's attempts at damage control were pathetic. She called multiple whispered consultations with her HOA lawyer, each conversation growing more frantic. Finally, she announced the meeting postponed pending legal review of new information and fled the community center, clutching Elena's envelope like it contained her death warrant. That evening, neighbors reported Karen's house blazing with lights past midnight. Her frantic internet searches and multiple attorney consultations suggested someone desperately trying to understand how completely she'd miscalculated. Elena spent the evening organizing her office with the satisfaction of a chess master executing a long-planned checkmate. Her methodical filing suggested whatever she'd handed Karen was just the opening move in a much larger strategy. "What was in that envelope?" I asked as Elena locked away her evening's work. Elena smiled with quiet anticipation. Karen's complete housing discrimination history from her previous neighborhoods. Turns out serial discriminators leave extensive paper trails across multiple jurisdictions. Outside, Karen's desperate phone calls continued past 2 a.m., apparently unaware her 8-year reign of suburban terrorism was entering its final act. Friday morning, I'm pouring coffee when Elena sits across from me at our kitchen table, still wearing yesterday's professional blazer, and says the words that rewrite our entire marriage. "Marcus, there's something about my work you need to know." The leather portfolio sits open between us, and for the first time I can see what's inside. Not book club notes or mysterious research. Court documents, legal briefs, official correspondence bearing the seal of the Arizona family court system. At the top of the stack, business cards reading, "The Honorable Elena Santos Martinez, Family Court Judge, Housing Division." My coffee mug freezes halfway to my lips. "You're a judge?" Elena nods with the careful precision I now recognize as judicial training. 15 years on this bench, specializing in housing discrimination and civil rights cases, recently appointed to the State Housing Appeals Board. She pauses, watching my expression process this information. I've been sitting in judgment of housing discrimination cases while living as the victim of one. The irony tastes bitter as burnt coffee. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Judicial ethics," Elena explains, spreading documents across our table with methodical care. "I couldn't use my position to fight Karen directly. That would be abuse of authority and could destroy my career. Everything I've gathered had to be collected as a private citizen experiencing discrimination firsthand." Those mysterious evening phone calls suddenly make sense. Elena hadn't been coordinating book clubs. She'd been conducting witness interviews with prosecutorial precision. Her weekend library research had been legal strategy sessions with civil rights attorneys. The boxes of work materials contained federal housing discrimination precedents and prosecution guidelines. Elena pulls out a thick folder labeled with Karen's name. What I handed Karen yesterday was her complete discrimination history from 3 previous neighborhoods, 8 years of identical patterns. targeting minorities, veterans, LGBTQ+ residents, anyone outside her suburban supremacist vision. My stomach drops as Elena explains Karen's expanding legal nightmare. The real estate business under investigation for fair housing violations. Multiple families filing discrimination complaints. HOA board members facing personal liability up to $100,000 under federal civil rights law. Karen doesn't just risk losing her HOA position, Elena continues with judicial detachment. She's facing potential federal criminal charges, financial ruin, and lifetime prohibition from housing-related businesses. Elena's strategic patience finally makes sense. She'd needed Karen to escalate violations to establish clear discriminatory patterns. Each targeted neighbor represented protected classes under federal law. Me for disability or veteran status, Mrs. Violet for race, Jake and Sierra for sexual orientation. Elena had been building a federal case while maintaining perfect ethical standards. The $3,900 lien threat was Karen's fatal error, Elena explains, her voice carrying the authority of someone who's sentenced actual criminals. Federal housing law specifically prohibits retaliatory enforcement against residents challenging discriminatory practices. Karen triggered anti-retaliation protections that carry criminal penalties. I'm staring at my wife like she's a stranger. All those evenings watching Elena organize documents with scientific precision, wondering about her mysterious confidence that everything would work out fine. She hadn't been hoping for justice. She'd been methodically constructing it. Karen has been committing federal crimes for years, Elena states with the finality of a judicial ruling. Housing discrimination, selective enforcement, retaliation against protected classes. Every violation notice she issued has been building evidence for her own prosecution. Elena closes the portfolio with satisfaction. That envelope contained more than Karen's history. It included contact information for federal housing investigators, civil rights attorneys, and state licensing authorities, all of whom are now aware of her criminal pattern. Outside, Karen's house stands dark and silent after her night of frantic legal consultations. She's probably discovering the scope of her liability: federal charges, state violations, personal bankruptcy, and professional destruction that would make our petty fines look like parking tickets. Elena had spent 2 years building the perfect legal trap, and Karen had walked directly into it. Saturday morning, our modest living room becomes the headquarters for what Elena calls Operation Karen Cleanup. Mrs. Violet arrives first, lugging a cardboard box that clanks with the weight of 18 months' worth of violation notices. Tom follows, carrying a folder thick enough to stop bullets, containing documentation of Karen's obsessive measurements of his Purple Heart memorial display. Jake and Sierra bring their phones loaded with screenshots of Karen's social media harassment, posts they'd wisely preserved before Karen's inevitable deletion sprees. Elena clears our coffee table with the efficiency of someone preparing for oral arguments, spreading documents across the surface like a general planning invasion. The aroma of Mrs. Violet's homemade jasmine tea mingles with the sharp scent of legal paperwork as Elena commands the room with natural judicial authority. "We're not just fighting a neighborhood bully," Elena begins, her courtroom voice cutting through morning pleasantries. "We're dismantling 8 years of systematic housing discrimination that violates more federal laws than a mob accountant." Mrs. Violet adjusts her reading glasses, studying Elena's meticulously organized timeline charts. "So this is bigger than HOA violations?" Elena pulls out a legal reference book that looks like it could serve as a doorstop. When HOAs enforce rules based on residents' race, disability, veteran status, or sexual orientation, individual board members face personal federal liability up to $100,000 per incident. Karen's been committing felonies disguised as neighborhood improvement. Tom nearly chokes on his coffee. Every violation notice she gave us could cost her $100,000. Each discriminatory enforcement action is a separate federal offense, Elena confirms with prosecutorial satisfaction. Karen's looking at potential liability exceeding her lifetime earning capacity. Elena transforms our neighbors into legal scholars, teaching us to document evidence with courtroom precision. Dates, witnesses, photographic proof. Karen's exact discriminatory statements. She explains the difference between correlation and causation, how to establish patterns versus isolated incidents, why Karen's selective enforcement constitutes intentional civil rights violations. Jake scrolls through saved Facebook posts, grinning with vindictive pleasure. "She deleted the really ugly stuff, but I screenshot everything, including her rant about certain people lowering property values." Social media evidence is prosecutorial gold, Elena explains, making notes in her legal pad. Karen documented her own bias in permanent time-stamped posts that prove discriminatory intent. Elena outlines our three-pronged attack strategy like she's briefing a federal task force. Simultaneous complaints to HUD's Fair Housing Office, Arizona Department of Real Estate, and the State Civil Rights Division. Coordinated federal civil rights lawsuit seeking damages and injunctive relief. HOA board recall election to permanently remove Karen from power. Residents can dissolve HOAs through majority petition when board members breach fiduciary duties, Elena explains, referencing another intimidating legal text. Karen's discrimination and financial irregularities constitute textbook breaches requiring immediate removal. Sierra perks up at the mention of financial irregularities. Wait, there's embezzlement too? Elena produces HOA financial records showing Karen had authorized $40,000 in legal fees without member approval, draining community reserve funds for her personal legal defense. The silence that follows tastes like institutional corruption exposed to daylight. The media angle could help other neighborhoods, Jake suggests, apparently thinking like a civil rights activist now. Elena nods approvingly. Phoenix Tribune's housing reporter is investigating Karen's pattern across multiple jurisdictions. 3 other HOAs paid discrimination settlements involving Karen's enforcement practices. She's a repeat offender with documented history. Tom asks about timing, and Elena reveals her masterpiece of legal choreography. All complaints filed simultaneously next Friday, preventing Karen from crafting individual defenses. Media Story breaks the same morning, ensuring public accountability alongside legal consequences. HOA recall petition circulated that afternoon, capitalizing on maximum community outrage. Karen's probably burning through legal consultations this weekend, Elena observes with quiet satisfaction. But she's facing liability exposure that exceeds her defense capacity. Federal violations, state licensing infractions, criminal fraud charges, her legal costs alone will destroy her financially before we reach discovery. Elena assigns tactical missions like a commanding officer. Mrs. Violet compiles neighborhood violation statistics proving discrimination patterns. Tom contacts veteran organizations about filing supportive legal briefs. Jake and Sierra document social media harassment for potential hate crime enhancement. What happens when Karen retaliates? Mrs. Violet asks, worry creeping into her voice. She won't surrender quietly. Elena's smile carries decades of courtroom victories. Any retaliation attempts constitute federal witness tampering and obstruction of justice. Karen's trapped in a legal maze with no exit strategies. Elena distributes business cards from federal housing investigators, civil rights attorneys, and state prosecutors like she's dealing cards for the final hand. Everyone's briefed on Karen's situation. They're waiting for our complaint filing to trigger formal criminal investigations. Afternoon sunlight streams through our windows, illuminating Elena's legal war room. Evidence charts, prosecution timelines, witness statements, federal contact lists. She's assembled everything needed to obliterate Karen's suburban dictatorship permanently. Next Friday, Elena promises, sealing the last evidence envelope with judicial finality, Karen Pemberton discovers what federal housing law enforcement looks like when you've spent years begging for their attention. Outside, Karen's house stands peacefully unaware that 6 neighbors are constructing her complete legal annihilation with scientific precision. Monday morning brought Karen's nuclear option. She'd discovered Elena's judicial identity and decided the best defense against a federal discrimination case was attacking a sitting judge. Because apparently, when you're drowning in legal quicksand, the smart move is grabbing a shark. Officer Rodriguez returns to our door looking like a man forced to investigate whether the sun rises in the west. This time he's carrying a formal harassment complaint and the expression of someone professionally obligated to waste everyone's time. Mrs. Pemberton claims Judge Santos is using judicial authority to intimidate HOA proceedings, he explains with barely concealed irritation. She wants a restraining order against a sitting judge for gardening peacefully in her own yard. The bitter taste of institutional absurdity fills my mouth as Elena handles the interview with professional grace that makes Karen's hysteria look even more unhinged. Elena provides documentation proving she'd maintained perfect ethical boundaries while Karen had been committing actual federal crimes for sport. Rodriguez leaves shaking his head, muttering about people who mistake drama for evidence. but Karen's judicial ethics complaint was just her opening act. Tuesday unleashed a social media campaign that made her previous posts look like church newsletters. Karen created an anonymous blog called Willowbrook Truth Teller that would make conspiracy theorists blush. Posts accused Elena of judicial corruption, intimidating honest community volunteers, and orchestrating legal terrorism against property values. The writing style screamed Karen, overwrought prose obsessed with real estate prices and victimhood. She'd apparently spent her weekend crafting an alternate universe where discriminating against minorities made her the victim of judicial conspiracy. Elena's response was surgical precision disguised as professional courtesy. She reported Karen's harassment to the Arizona Judicial Conduct Commission, which dismissed Karen's complaint as frivolous retaliation. Elena maintained perfect positioning, documenting witness intimidation while never leveraging judicial authority inappropriately. Tuesday evening, I'd had enough. My Facebook post defending Elena's integrity went viral across veteran and housing rights networks. My wife never abused her position. If anything, she bent over backward ensuring Karen got due process. Karen never offered anyone else. Elena built her case the hard way, as a victim collecting evidence, not a judge wielding power. The response was overwhelming. Shares, supportive comments, media attention that transformed Karen's anonymous blog into pathetic noise compared to a Purple Heart recipient defending his wife's honor. Wednesday brought Karen's financial Hail Mary, convincing the remaining board to hire Phoenix's most expensive white shoe law firm at $750 per hour. Without member approval, she'd authorized $50,000 from community reserve funds, money intended for actual neighborhood improvements, not Karen's legal defense fund. The neighborhood erupted. Mrs. Patterson, usually neutral as Switzerland, demanded immediate financial audits. The Johnsons threatened separate lawsuits over unauthorized expenditures. Karen had managed to unite the entire community against her through spectacular fiscal incompetence. Thursday afternoon delivered Karen's masterpiece of criminal stupidity, approaching Tom in his driveway with a bribery offer disguised as neighborly conversation. "Look, this whole military discrimination thing is getting blown out of proportion," Karen says, unaware Tom's phone is recording every word. "If you could just sign a statement saying my enforcement was always fair and consistent, we could make all these problems disappear for everyone." Tom, being considerably smarter than Karen estimated, let her dig deeper. "You mean like a sworn statement?" "Exactly. Just clarifying that you never felt targeted as a veteran. I know these military issues are sensitive, but documentation would help clear the air." Elena listened to the recording with the focused intensity of someone hearing multiple felony confessions. Witness tampering, obstruction of justice, attempted bribery, explicit admission of targeting veterans. Karen just created evidence for 6 additional federal charges. The recording's legal implications were staggering. Karen had confessed to discriminatory enforcement while simultaneously attempting to obstruct federal investigation through witness bribery. It was like watching someone commit crimes while live streaming their own prosecution. By Thursday evening, Karen's support structure had collapsed completely. Her crisis management consultant resigned after Karen violated every piece of professional advice. Her HOA attorney began publicly distancing the firm from Karen's increasingly problematic statements. Even Karen's husband started making apologetic neighborhood calls, clearly attempting damage control for their imploding reputation. Elena documented every desperate move with prosecutorial thoroughness, each intimidation attempt, every false accusation, all preserved for federal investigators building what was clearly becoming a criminal racketeering case. "Karen's panic is constructing our prosecution timeline," Elena observed Friday evening, organizing the week's evidence bonanza. "Every retaliation attempt strengthens our federal case while adding new criminal charges to her potential indictment." Karen's house blazed with emergency activity past midnight all week. Frantic legal consultations, crisis management calls, the unmistakable sounds of someone discovering their suburban dictatorship was about to meet federal law enforcement. Saturday morning, as Elena prepared final evidence packages, an unexpected call arrived. Karen's private investigator, the one she'd hired to find dirt on Elena, wanted to speak with us directly. "Ma'am, I need to apologize," he said to Elena. "Mrs. Pemberton asked me to manufacture evidence against a sitting judge. I'm prepared to testify about her attempts to fabricate federal crimes." Friday morning brought Karen's final performance. A 911 call so unhinged it belonged in a criminal psychology textbook rather than a neighborhood dispute. Emergency services. What's your emergency? There's a dangerous individual trespassing on community property and threatening residents with judicial authority. Officer Rodriguez's radio crackled at 6:47 a.m. as he responded to what dispatch had already flagged as Karen's fourth false emergency call this month. He arrived to find Elena peacefully watering tomatoes in our backyard, completely unaware she was allegedly terrorizing the neighborhood through aggressive gardening. His body camera captured the entire surreal encounter as Karen demanded Elena's arrest for abuse of judicial power and intimidating community volunteers through strategic plant cultivation. Rodriguez recognized Elena from courthouse interactions and spent 20 minutes documenting Karen's increasingly frantic accusations. "Ma'am, Judge Santos is watering vegetables in her own yard," Rodriguez explained with superhuman patience. "The only crime here is wasting emergency resources on personal disputes." Karen's meltdown was spectacular. "She's destroying property values through legal intimidation. This is judicial corruption disguised as gardening. I demand federal investigation immediately." The acrid scent of Karen's desperation was almost visible as Elena calmly provided Rodriguez with documentation of the months-long harassment campaign. His report later noted Karen's pattern of frivolous emergency calls targeting sitting judge over neighborhood violations. By Saturday morning, emergency dispatch had flagged Karen's number for abuse after she'd called 911 6 times in 24 hours. Elena's morning jog constituted surveillance and stalking. Our American flag represented militant intimidation display. Elena checking our mailbox was judicial harassment of community leadership. The 911 operators were treating Karen like the neighborhood lunatic she'd become. Saturday afternoon delivered Karen's attempted coup, an emergency HOA meeting claiming Elena's family posed immediate threat to community safety. Scheduled for 6 a.m. Sunday with minimum legal notice, designed for maximum inconvenience and minimal attendance. 3 people showed up: Karen, her last remaining board ally, and Mrs. Violet, who attended specifically to document Karen's statements for federal evidence. Karen's performance belonged in psychiatric evaluation rather than community governance. She demanded Elena's immediate neighborhood removal, claiming judicial immunity shouldn't protect corrupt officials destroying community standards through legal terrorism. Next, she proposed new bylaws requiring enhanced surveillance of households engaged in intimidation activities. Mrs. Violet recorded everything, while Karen ranted about Elena's systematic assault on property values through abuse of legal authority. The audio captured Karen making explicitly discriminatory statements about certain types of people who exploit victim status to manipulate honest community members. Elena reviewed the recording with clinical fascination. Karen just confessed to federal hate crimes while live-streaming her own criminal prosecution. She's essentially building our case for us. Sunday brought the week's most telling development. Karen's expensive legal team filed emergency withdrawal motions, citing irreconcilable differences regarding strategy and client conduct. Translation: lawyers who'd defend mob bosses found Karen too unhinged for representation. The sound of legal bills hitting Karen's mailbox had become a daily occurrence, and even white-collar criminal defense attorneys were fleeing her toxic case. Sunday evening, Karen's husband Mark arrived at our door carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the expression of someone whose marriage had become a federal crime scene. The man looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 weeks. "I owe you both an apology," Mark began, his voice carrying the weight of someone whose life had imploded. "Karen's been struggling. Anxiety medication mixed with alcohol, financial pressure from losing real estate clients, increasing paranoia about neighborhood property values." Mark's explanation painted a picture of someone spiraling into mental illness, but didn't excuse 8 years of systematic discrimination. He revealed that Karen had been self-medicating with prescription drugs while obsessing over property values as the solution to their declining finances. "Anyone who threatened her suburban fantasy became the enemy," Mark continued sadly. "But seeing this federal investigation has opened my eyes to how far she's fallen. I'm filing for separation tomorrow." Mark handed Elena a flash drive containing Karen's personal files, emails, financial records, communications with other HOA boards where she'd implemented identical discrimination campaigns. "She needs professional help, not legal protection." Monday morning brought federal investigators to Karen's real estate office, executing search warrants that uncovered systematic steering of minority clients away from white neighborhoods while charging discriminatory fees based on buyer demographics. Elena organized evidence that now filled 4 bankers' boxes, enough documentation to prosecute civil rights violations in multiple jurisdictions. Karen created a federal case any prosecutor could win blindfolded, she observed with professional satisfaction. Tuesday morning, Elena made the call that would end Karen's 8-year reign of suburban terrorism. "This is Judge Santos calling the Federal Civil Rights Division. We're ready to file coordinated complaints against Karen Pemberton. Her discrimination campaign officially ends today." Outside, Karen's house sat silent for the first time since we'd moved in. No morning patrol walks, no violation photography, no measuring tape sessions. The woman who'd documented everyone else's lives was about to discover what federal documentation looked like. The taste of justice was finally replacing months of bitter frustration. Wednesday evening, the Phoenix Community Center buzzed with energy that felt more like a courtroom than a town hall meeting. Word had spread about Karen's federal investigation, and nearly 300 residents packed the auditorium for the city's emergency session on HOA reform and fair housing enforcement. The bright television lights made everyone squint as Channel 12 News prepared for live coverage that would broadcast Karen's downfall to the entire metropolitan area. Elena and I arrived early, sitting in the middle section like private citizens rather than the prosecutors we'd become. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with nervous energy as residents who'd suffered under various HOA tyrants across Phoenix filled every available seat. Karen's story had become a catalyst for citywide housing reform discussions. Karen entered 20 minutes late with her crisis management consultant and a new lawyer, apparently the only attorney in Phoenix willing to represent someone facing federal civil rights charges. She wore a navy blazer that couldn't hide her obvious weight loss and carried a prepared statement thick enough to filibuster Congress. Her hands trembled visibly as she took her seat in the front row, directly under the unforgiving television lights. City Council member Patricia Williams opened the session by reading complaints from 12 different neighborhoods about discriminatory HOA enforcement. Karen's pattern had been replicated across the metropolitan area, making her case a symbol of systemic housing discrimination rather than isolated neighborhood dispute. Tonight, we hear from residents who've experienced what federal investigators are now calling organized civil rights violations disguised as community governance, Williams announced, her voice carrying judicial authority that made Karen shrink further into her seat. Mrs. Violet testified first, speaking with quiet dignity about 18 months of harassment targeting her Chinese heritage. Every Lunar New Year decoration, every traditional garden plant, every cultural celebration, all violations according to Mrs. Pemberton. But identical displays by white neighbors never receive citations. The audience's collective intake of breath was audible as Mrs. Violet presented side-by-side photos proving selective enforcement. Karen's lawyer whispered frantically in her ear, probably explaining how federal hate crime enhancement worked in housing discrimination cases. Tom followed with military precision, describing Karen's obsessive documentation of his Purple Heart Memorial while ignoring identical patriotic displays by non-veteran neighbors. "She measured my flag with a ruler," Tom stated, producing photographs, then claimed veteran memorials violated aesthetic standards while approving identical displays 3 houses down. Jake and Sierra presented their timeline of LGBTQ+ discrimination, including social media posts where Karen had complained about lifestyle choices affecting family neighborhood values. Their documentation showed Karen targeting pride symbols while protecting religious displays with identical visual impact. When my turn came, I focused on disability discrimination and financial harassment. Karen fined us $3,900 for violations that weren't violations, targeting a disabled veteran's medical accommodations while ignoring bigger infractions by her friends. The message was clear: conform to her vision or face financial destruction. Karen's prepared statement was spectacular disaster television. She rose on shaking legs, attempting to portray herself as a dedicated volunteer victim of coordinated legal harassment by residents seeking to avoid legitimate accountability. Her voice cracked as she claimed Elena had weaponized judicial authority to escape proper enforcement, and insisted her documentation patterns were consistent application of established community standards designed to protect everyone's property investments. The audience's reaction was immediate and brutal. Laughter, groans, angry shouts from residents who'd experienced Karen's consistent enforcement firsthand. Channel 12's cameras captured every moment as Karen's alternate reality collapsed under public scrutiny. Then Elena stood. The room fell completely silent as Elena approached the microphone with the measured stride of someone accustomed to commanding courtroom attention. She wore simple business attire, carried no notes, and spoke with the authority of 15 years dispensing justice from the bench. "I am Judge Elena Santos Martinez of the Arizona Family Court System," she began, her voice cutting through the auditorium like a legal judgment. "For 2 years I maintained complete ethical neutrality while experiencing housing discrimination in my own neighborhood. Every piece of evidence we've presented was collected as a private citizen victim, never using judicial authority inappropriately." Elena's presence transformed the entire proceeding from community meeting to criminal trial. Karen's lawyer attempted to interrupt, claiming conflict of interest, but Elena continued with prosecutorial precision. "Mrs. Pemberton's enforcement records show mathematical impossibility of random compliance monitoring. 92% of violations targeted protected classes under federal housing law. This isn't community governance. It's systematic civil rights violations prosecuted under color of law." Elena paused, making eye contact with Karen across the packed auditorium. The television lights caught Karen's pale complexion and obvious terror as a sitting judge enumerated her federal crimes on live television. "Housing discrimination isn't about property values or community standards," Elena concluded with the finality of judicial ruling. "It's about equal protection under law. When you target people for who they are rather than what they've done, you're not enforcing rules, you're enforcing prejudice. And in America, prejudice isn't just morally wrong, it's federally illegal." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Karen fled during the applause, abandoning her lawyer and crisis consultant as Channel 12 cameras followed her panicked exit. The woman who'd terrorized neighborhoods through documentation had just been documented committing career suicide on live television. Outside, federal investigators were already serving additional search warrants based on evening testimony, ensuring Karen's legal nightmare was just beginning. 6 months later, justice tastes sweeter than Elena's homegrown tomatoes. Karen pled guilty to 3 federal felonies: housing discrimination, obstruction of justice, and embezzlement, receiving 2 years probation, $180,000 in restitution to discrimination victims, and a lifetime ban from HOA board positions anywhere in Arizona. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, and she quietly moved to Nevada to avoid ongoing legal scrutiny and neighborhood shame. Our community transformation was remarkable. The new HOA board, elected on a platform of equal enforcement and inclusive governance, dissolved Karen's discriminatory violation structure and refunded every cent of her bogus fines. Mrs. Patterson, previously terrified of Karen's measuring tape, became our new president with a mandate to treat all residents with dignity and respect. Elena spearheaded creation of the Willowbrook Community Garden in the shared space where Karen once demanded native plants only. Every plot reflects our neighborhood's diversity. Mrs. Violet's traditional Chinese vegetables, Tom's memorial herb garden, Jake and Sierra's rainbow flower display, and Elena's prize-winning tomatoes that started this whole justice campaign. The garden's success led to monthly coffee with neighbors gatherings that build relationships across cultural and generational lines. Property values actually increased 20% over 6 months. Turns out, inclusive communities attract buyers better than discriminatory HOAs repel them. Elena's professional recognition was extraordinary. Chief Judge Patricia Morrison assigned her to Arizona's new housing rights court, making Elena the state's leading authority on residential discrimination cases. She's testified before the Arizona legislature on HOA reform legislation and spoken at national judicial conferences about maintaining ethics under harassment. Elena's case study is now required reading in law school civil rights courses, demonstrating how victims can build federal cases while maintaining perfect legal boundaries. The Arizona Bar Association gave Elena their Courage Under Fire Award for upholding judicial integrity while facing systematic harassment. My own purpose emerged from our struggle. The Veterans Housing Rights blog I started reached 75,000 subscribers and became a resource for disabled veterans facing HOA discrimination nationwide. I testified before the Arizona legislature supporting the HOA Accountability Act, which requires bias training for board members and creates state oversight for discrimination complaints. The new law allows discrimination victims to recover triple damages plus attorney fees, making Karen-style harassment financially devastating for future discriminators. Elena consulted on the legislation while maintaining judicial neutrality, ensuring the law protected victims without creating loopholes for abuse. Our scholarship fund became the crown jewel of community healing. The Willowbrook Diversity Scholarship supports law students studying housing rights, with Elena and me contributing the first $10,000 from our federal settlement. Local businesses and residents donated enthusiastically, reaching $75,000 in 8 months. Our first recipient was Maria Gonzalez, an underprivileged student whose family had faced HOA discrimination similar to ours. Maria is studying civil rights law at Arizona State University, planning to become the advocate her family needed but couldn't afford. The ripple effects spread beyond our neighborhood. Phoenix Tribune's investigative series on HOA discrimination won the Arizona Press Association's Public Service Award, leading to criminal investigations of discriminatory boards across metropolitan Phoenix. 3 other HOAs paid substantial settlements after residents used our documentation strategies to prove selective enforcement. Elena's Know Your Housing Rights workshops became monthly fixtures at the Phoenix Public Library, teaching residents how to recognize and document discrimination, when to contact federal authorities, and how state sunshine laws protect access to HOA financial records and meeting minutes. Knowledge truly became power for communities facing suburban tyrants. Our marriage emerged stronger through shared struggle. Elena's revelation about her judicial career initially shocked me, but understanding her ethical constraints deepened my respect for her integrity. We'd fought injustice together while maintaining the legal standards that make justice possible. Tom organized our first annual Willowbrook Unity Festival on the anniversary of Karen's downfall, celebrating diversity, community service, and housing rights education. Local food trucks, cultural performances, legal aid booths, and Elena judging the pie contest while I organized the Veterans Honor Ceremony. The festival's success inspired neighboring communities to launch similar celebrations, spreading our message that diversity strengthens rather than threatens property values. As I write this, Karen's former house displays a sold sign and welcomes the Rodriguez family, a young Hispanic couple with kids who Elena personally assured would face no harassment under our new community leadership. Elena's community garden thrives where Karen once demanded $3,900 in fines for growing vegetables. The sound of children's laughter fills the air where Karen's measuring tape once terrorized neighbors. Sometimes the worst neighbors teach us the most about community. Next week's story: how a disabled Marine service dog training operation exposed his HOA president's $400,000 embezzlement scheme and the FBI evidence they found buried in her backyard. What's your worst HOA nightmare? Share your story below. You might be more powerful than you realize. And subscribe for more tales of everyday heroes defeating petty tyrants through knowledge, courage, and community action.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.